Hey everybody, welcome to the Dreamer's Edge podcast with
Francois, a librarian and occasional contributor to the website.
Chris, subtitler and occasional writer for the site as well.
And I am Dimitri, editor-in-chief of the website, otherwise known as idiomatic.com, and movie critic. Following up on our long journey down cinematic history, we have reached a point when we are going to talk about the worst of the 60s.
Man, that's a pretty bad decade. Lots of long hair and smoking the marijuana.
There's a lot of dirty people hanging out. This is the first time we've actually revealed ourselves ahead of the podcast because we're finding it harder as we go down this, path to have the discussion going because we haven't all seen the same movies, whatever. So I found it interesting this time because I recognized a lot of the names. I didn't recognize all of them. Some of them have been on my list to see. Then it was like suddenly they showed up on like the worst ofs. I was like, oh, interesting.
So for those of you just joining us in this podcast format, if you didn't know, what we have been doing for the past year is listing our top 3 best or worst movie, depending on the episode of each decade going backwards.
We also used to be 4, but Nick tapped out.
He tapped out. That's true. That is true. Nick used to be doing this, and he's busy with working on our spin-off series, and also he just didn't want to visit those really old movies anymore. It was like, I don't know which ones. Okay, I only have one. Screw you guys. I'm out of here. You want me to start?
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. All right. So top 3 worst movies of the 60s for me. We're going to start with number 3, Andy Warhol's Asleep, 1963. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's 2 hours and a half, essentially, of a woman sleeping. And the camera doesn't move. And you're supposed to start admiring the grain and all of these things. And the thing for me that bugs me, it's not just that it's boring, it doesn't work in a movie. That's obvious. He was trying to do high art, not storytelling entertainment. That's not why I blame him for it. It's just that his idea of removing editing from a movie is sort of like watching the Renaissance painters and going like, you know what? Let's start working with crayons again. It's just, you're not proving anything that wasn't proven at the beginning of cinema. So even as high art, for me, it's a waste of time.
Okay. No, I completely agree. And I see your point and disagree with it in that I've got a problem with, I'm a big art fan, but at the same time, I'll go into a museum and I really don't like the video installations. This type of thing belongs there, and all it is an installation. It's an experiment. It's an attempt. It's a pose. Now, what I still find Warhol being interesting in is going back to your idea about the idea of the Renaissance is that these people didn't work on their own. Basically, I would work with you and, in your atelier, and eventually you would teach me how to mix the yellow paint, and oh wow, now I've been here 10 years, finally the blue, you're famous for the blue, and you would draw the outline, I would paint the inside, you would do the background, I would do the clouds, you know what I mean, then we would probably have gay sex after, whatever, you know what I mean, and going back to Warhol, basically he invented the idea of the factory very famously, but he approached all his art in that way. He took away the idea of ownership, and someone at one point gave him a video camera, and he said, oh, okay, I'll start doing films. And he approached him in that same way. It was just a thing. He took film, and he just pointed the camera, and he kind of stepped back. And he was like, oh, I'm not doing anything, but I put my name on it, so I've done it. Has he done anything? Who knows? But the idea of sleep is where the camera focuses, and it's basically on the abdomen of the person, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm remembering the movie. And basically, you're just watching for 2 hours, not the face, not anything else. You're just watching the abdomen of a person go up and down. This was at the point in art history where they're invested in the idea of line and ownership and whatever. And it's basically, you're just watching this line, almost like the ocean, in a way. You know what I mean? Go up and down, and eventually it gets more and more abstract. And it means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. All you're watching is basically a moving painting.
Yeah.
And so it is interesting. He's done other things where he's Empire, where he filmed the Empire State Building for 9 hours or whatever it is, with the light going up and down, And another one of my favorite movies by him, when I say favorite, it's within parentheses, but it's just again, it's an interesting thing. It's just he just put a stationary camera, walked away, and he filmed someone's face as they're getting a blowjob. Interestingly, he called the movie Blowjob.
Shocking.
I don't find it a movie. I just find it like a weird like thing.
It's art,
that
not film.
tries to be a painting.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, whereas some of the other movies that you put on your list, I'm like, wow, that tried to be a movie and it failed.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, which is why it's number 3.
Yeah. But I agree though. Like, it was just like that was the beginning of like, oh, cinema is art. Cinema. It's cinema. It's not a movie. But like, no, it's not always. Like, you know what I mean? What's the crux of what cinema is? You know what I mean? Like, and I think it tried to push it to a place where, no, I don't want to embrace that line of thought necessarily. Yeah. But I'm glad he did it.
I see your point. I think to a certain degree, though, the idea of using that as an argument to make cinema art is sort of removing cinema from filming, if you will. Which is like, well, you're not making cinema art; you're making filming shit art.
He started out with those movies, you know, like these black and white movies with no voice, and then he eventually became talkies, and then he basically invented a star system, and so even his own progression of bad movies, you know what I mean, like basically imitated Hollywood, which is interesting, you know.
That is an interesting
at a microcosmic thing.
Yeah, very good point.
And then these people started kind of like failing out, drugging out, you know, whatever, you know. But it's like that progression of like him almost like trying to understand film followed. You know what I mean? Like he started adding in the narrative, adding in this, and he went at it from a different angle. You know what I mean? But it was interesting the way it kind of approached, you know, or paralleled. You know what I mean? Like what had happened, you know, 50 years before. You know.
I think it's one of my criticisms about that, though, is a criticism I have with modern art in general. And listeners, be warned that I am not one of those people who poo-poos modern art systematically. I actually don't. But the thing is, a lot of these artists that started the modern art movements are people who wanted to strip themselves from the rigidity of the education they received and sort of explore new venues of artistic expression. And that's why it looks weird, it's off-putting, or it looks primitive. And they were attempting that, and that I respect.
Anything new is not beautiful, you know.
Yeah, exactly. And that I respect as a movement. But what happened afterwards is that there was a wave of artists who thought that creating art was always reinventing the wheel, if you will. And I feel Andy Warhol, in his career, certainly has gone into that direction, but with an actual point to make, which makes him legitimate to me. But when it comes to cinema, to call Sleep cinema as opposed to a moving painting, as you called it, I think is misleading because he's reinventing the wheel and has reached a point where it's so primitive that it's like you haven't reached the point where it's cinema yet. Cinema has a narrative, has editing, has camera placement, all of that, which these movies don't. The Andy Warhol Sleep doesn't.
No. And I agree with you on that point. But at the same time, you're scaling it back to a point where a lot of us haven't had a chance to see movies like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So by looking at that, then, you know, maybe I'll like another movie more.
Moving on. Number 2, 1967 film starring James Bond. Casino Royale, based on the Ian Fleming novel, and turned into a farce. This is not a James Bond movie in the broccoli tradition, if you will. By broccoli, I mean Barbara Broccoli and not the vegetable.
United Artists, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This was a British comedy that was made by people who bought the rights for Casino Royale and just decided to make this really awful comedy that is just... I mean, it's hard to bitch on a comedy because either the humor works or doesn't, but the humor really fell flat for me.
I've always looked on Casino Royale as a failed Pink Panther movie for some reason.
Yeah,
I can see that.
Like a weird, sort of around the same phase, but like, and I mean, Peter Sellers has a part in it, but it's not like the main part.
No. It's completely the type of thing I hate. Like, just this weird, sprawling narrative that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Like, you know, and it's like, I don't know why it was made. It makes no sense. Like, there's no theme at the end. It's just like I don't know where to end it. I think like a UFO is going to come, and like, you know, like it's just, it makes no sense.
A very
like,
60s experimental, goofy,
hippie-ish
with,
culture.
But is it experimental? Like, because we've seen this
you're
crap a lot.
Right. It's not a traditional movie, so maybe that's why I'm
But it was quite traditional for the time. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of movies just kind of did that weird, like, Blazing Saddles-ish, like, just starts off with a plot, and it's like they don't know how to finish it.
Does anybody know?
They've done the pitch, they've got the first half of the movie written, they start filming, and it's like on the set, they're like, oh, let's just start doing stuff.
Yeah, well, he does that thing that I hate for comedies, the ending, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, Chris, based on your other picks from previous episodes. But it's a lot of these comedies from that period and 70s and 80s on as well, those sort of slapsticky, we don't have to make sense comedies, just end with like mayhem. Because apparently mayhem is hilarious.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like, I don't know, for some reason I associate those types of endings with the 60s a lot. I don't know if it was like a need to act out or whatnot, but like a goofy, crazy ending.
It feels more like, oh, we're going to pile this thing on and this thing
we're
on.
We're about to get into Vietnam and we don't know how to pull out of that. So this is, maybe it's like foreshadowing. Like,
well, yeah. Chaos is not inherently funny. It's like, oh, there's a lot of stuff going on and I don't know what's going on and let's throw this image and that image.
Oh, there's a pie. Oh, yeah.
It's like, it's not funny.
No.
It got used in a whole bunch of movies, so who knows? Like, I don't know. It would be interesting to figure out
if,
where
all these movies were edited by the same person. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like it went to this one guy who's like, I'll save your movie.
No, and I think the build-up to mayhem that can work in certain instances, and I think that's what they try to reproduce, is the idea that if you set up your ducks all in a row and then knock them all down at the same time, it's going to look like a chaotic scene where all of the punchlines are coming out at the same time. I can see how that's effective, but when you're just artificially generating mayhem out of nowhere without setting it up, which is what Casino Royale does, then it's just like, well, you just invited people to a party. Why do I care?
I think the first part of your argument was entirely too well reasoned to be what is actually the truth. I think it's really yeah, man, that looks funny. Yeah, let's just do all this. You know, the thing about setting up thing is way too smart, man. No, it's the latter. It's the latter for sure. Like, it's just, chaos is funny, man. Let's just throw that in.
On that note, moving on to number one pick, which is a 1970 movie. Now, keep in mind, the decade starts at the end of the 1970th year, not the beginning of it. So I'm including it. It is Beneath the Planet of the Apes, sequel, of course, to the Planet of the Apes, which we talked about in a previous episode.
Is that the one where they're all underground?
Yeah.
And
Charlton Heston has figured out that he's on Earth, has gone to the edge of the Forbidden Zone, and ends up in the underground. Now, there's another astronaut that comes in for God only knows what reason, goes through the exact same motions that we've seen in the first movie, except in accelerated motion, because he has to go through the exact same journey, because otherwise you're not checking the boxes. And then goes under Earth, and then it turns into like one of the worst Star Trek episodes I have ever seen, where they meet underground psychic people who believe in the bomb, and it's just this heavy-handed analogy for bombs are bad.
Like, is that the one where the Earth gets blown up?
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, okay. Which, I still say that maybe I liked it because it was like a very Star Trek-y thing. Like,
I take away the Star Trek stuff.
Well, I'm just going to say it. Star Trek.
No, you know
but
what? Like,
there was something so, like, I knew the Planet of the Apes, it was like X number of movies, you know what I mean? Like, and it's just like, I knew there was like 5 in the series, and it's like, I watched the first one, I'm like, wow, this is actually pretty good. I knew some of the things, I thought I knew them, but in the context, it was actually kind of kooky. There's like the weird desert scene. Like, it's actually kind of an interesting movie, you know, whatever. You know, like, it's obviously dated. But I knew I still had 4 movies to go. Then I watched the second one, and then I watched the second one, and like, the Earth gets blown up at the end of it. I'm like, but wait a second, my box set has 3 other VHSs. What is happening? I don't understand. Like, no one told me about this. Has no one seen this one? So I still have a sense of like nostalgia for that moment of like before Wikipedia was around and I couldn't read the synopsis right away. You know what I mean? Like, I was stuck there with like, what's going on? I must pop in the next one.
What will I do next? You know, it's funny. Planet of the Apes, to me, the whole series, it's a quintessentially depressing, pessimistic universe. Like, it's
not a lot of science fiction is really uplifting when you get down to it, though.
The ending of Beneath the Planet of the Apes is so bleak.
Oh, yeah.
The same way, to a certain extent, like, Planet of the Apes is a fairly bleak movie, okay? I mean, like, you know, this astronaut loses his friends. You know, like that final scene is like it's so iconic. But Beneath the Planet of the Apes is sort of like this product of this successful weird movie, which was based on a really kind of a weird book by Pierre Boulle, I think. Who also
a really
wrote
bad one at that.
A really bad one at that. And you know, they make this movie which is really odd, and you watch a second one and oh my god, is that a kind of a weirdly depressing movie? And for some reason, what appeals to me about it is just how, yeah, you know, like they had the guts to produce that, and it just went places that I haven't really seen other movies go to.
No, I agree.
You know, like they really sell the notion of humans being really just a wayward race that has been completely supplanted by these apes who ruled them the way. In some ways,
we should have ruled ourselves.
But that's the first movie. Like that's the thing is like most of what people will praise about Beneath the Planet of the Apes is they'll start talking about the entire series, then praise the first one, and then go, and that's why I like Beneath the Planet of the Apes. But it's like Beneath the Planet of the Apes just coasts on the first one, repeating the same beat in the first 45 minutes. And since you've already seen them, it's sort of like, why am I watching this? And then goes into this really offbeat direction that is entertaining at first because it's so different, but doesn't really get you into a journey because it's always on that bleak beat. And you know, the original Planet of the Apes tricks you by giving you a red herring, by making you think that this guy is going to get out of this situation. And then it's like, barp, 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 you created your own hell, buddy, you know?
Yeah.
And in this one, it's sort of like, things are fucked, things are fucked, things are fucked, and then the planet blows up. It's like, okay. Like, why do I care?
You do, you know, like I admit that you do make a good point there. And particularly, I think you had me when you said people talk about this movie and praise it, but then start talking about the other entries in the series. Mm-hmm. And I think you're not wrong there. I think maybe there's something about the way it's presented, like the final narration. Yeah, I mean, it's just so bleak that somebody has to narrate what actually happens in the end because no one's there to actually say that they're dead. It's just like, you know, this planet orbiting this sun, which is now dead. But you're not wrong about that. People like I've recognized that tendency myself. Like I'll tend to praise the series, but when I talk about this one. All
right, then moving on, Chris, what is your number 3 pick for worst movie of the 60s?
I start off with Nutty Professor. 1963. Jerry Lewis, who apes Dean Martin in basically his persona in this movie, because it's basically, the Nutty Professor is it's just so poorly acted, it's just weird, you know what I mean? Like, and it's the whole idea of like, oh, he's not an actor, he's a clown, but it's just like, I don't know, why do I need to watch that? But it's done, and then there's basically, he plays a professor who invents a formula that basically does kind of like a Jekyll and Hyde thing. It turns him into like a smooth operator, where he's basically, apparently, impersonating Dean Martin. So he's just
as if anybody could.
As if anyone could, but they used to be partners, you know, so, you know, maybe he's better than some. But he's basically like a sexist jackass who walks around and does all these things. But he keeps reverting back to his nerdy, nutty professor character every now and then. Meanwhile, there's like whole sorts of things going on. He's in love with one of his students, blah, blah, blah. Shenanigans happen. Again, one of those movies that just ends poorly. The comedy is so strange and strained. And it's just... And it inspired a remake. And, you know,
I was going to say, how does it hold up to the remake?
Well, the remake is its own thing. You know what I mean? But it's just like, why did it deserve it? Like, you know...
People like Nutty Professors.
No, but I will say, give or take a couple of unnecessary fart jokes, the Eddie Murphy version is actually superior to the original.
I think so too. You know what I mean? But
it has more heart.
Yeah, yeah. This one was very like just poorly done. Like there, like so many goofs on the set. Like you're just watching things and like you know things are almost falling apart. Like it's just like it's like they filmed it over like 2 months, and, like you know on someone else's budget, and it's just like they just figured they're going to make money. I don't know. It's just like it seemed like. It's almost like a money laundering scheme. Like it's just like there is no heart to this movie. Like,
and dragging it down is Jerry Lewis's really over the top Jim Carrey-esque buffoonery, which I like you. I don't understand why that's funny. Like I don't understand why an actor behaving like he's not part of the movie is somehow enhancing the comedy
I
of the
don't
movie.
get it. It's a weird. It distances me from the whole affair.
Mm.
Everyone else acting like people, and then this person acting like no one who would not be in an insane asylum.
Yeah.
Makes no sense to me.
The Jim Carrey comparison is actually very apt.
Mm.
It's a shoe that fits, I think. Like, I think those two guys have had the kind of a similar, very different times, obviously, and yet very, very similar styles, or what they stand for and whatnot.
It dovetails nicely into my second, which is 1965's Much Adored, but by me.
Much.
No, I don't hate it. You know what I mean? But it's a movie that I think has just gotten more attention than it deserves. Here's a movie that I recently read. Christopher Plummer basically said, like, why are people still talking about it? I've done so many other things that are so much better. And
he's right.
And he's completely right. You know what I mean? Like, but this movie, for some reason, has... And the reason I read that was because it was in a reaction essay based on Jim Carrey's coming out and basically saying that he can't support Kick-Ass 2, So, which is the link there, but it's just like... And I thought to myself, like, it's true. Like, Sound of Music, it plays all the time. I'm never sucked into it. It's just like, it's a thing I know. It's a part of my fabric of my being. But it's just like, I have no love for this movie. It's just like, granted, I'm not musical. I'm not musically inclined, so it's certainly not aimed at me, and there's no one thing that's wrong necessarily, except I don't like cute kids. But for me, this movie just like falls flat.
It's true, by the way. Listeners, Chris will only respond to butt ugly kids.
It's true. It's true.
Thing. I actually like the movie quite a bit. But I understand what you're saying about it being grossly overrated. Certainly, I think what makes it work and what has stayed in most people's memory is the music. The songs are great. They're really good, fun songs that are easy to sing along to and fun to memorize. And I think that's a big part as to why it's stayed in people's memory, because it's sort of a nice audience participation type of thing. The story linking those song numbers together is not exceptional, though. It's a little bit swing kidsy-ish, to be honest.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good.
I don't know. Like, I'll be quite honest. Like, I don't mind the movie. I remember really liking the relationship between Christopher Plummer and.
Is it Julie Andrews? Who is it?
Yeah, it is Julie Andrews.
Julie Andrews. Yeah. No, yeah. I mean, I don't know what it is. Like, there's a really, really cool scene where, like, they're talking back and forth, and she stands up to him.
It's one of those movies that tries to tell the story of the Second World War and ends up belittling the whole thing.
Yeah, that's true.
You know what I mean? By just being so sloppy about the whole, And so it uses something that is bigger than life. And that, you know what I mean? Like, sure, it seems to be painted with black and white. There's good guys and bad guys. And fine, it's an easy way to kind of frame a story because it's the thing you don't need to explain because we all know that the Nazis are bad guys or whatever. You know what I mean? But it's just like...
But they make such great bad guys.
But you still have to put a good story around it. You know what I mean? Like, it's just... Shorthand like that only works so much, and then it's just becomes sloppy.
Yeah. No, I get where you're coming from, definitely.
No, they should definitely have been brought together, captured, brought to a stalag where they had to actually break out and really, truly earn their freedom. That would have been awesome.
On a motorcycle.
No, but I do feel like, that the movie sort of glorifies the Von Trapps, and what did they do? They fled.
They didn't do anything. They weren't Schindler,
exactly.
Did,
I won't blame them for fleeing. Good for them, but that's not that's an accomplishment, but it's not a heroic act.
Exactly.
And also, history has shown us that the Von Trapp, and especially Maria, not a great person.
No.
So. I don't know, but she tortured these children. She one of them ended up in an asylum. She didn't want to sing with them anymore. She was fed up with the family singing. So she had her committed to a mental institution where they did shock therapy until there was nothing left of that poor girl's brain.
It's the original Jackson 5.
I'm actually...
I laugh because it's
really...
sad.
I think, Dimitri, you've killed
You've poisoned the whole
a
movie.
little part of me right now. I think I'm not going to be able to watch that movie again ever. Oh my god!
Oh,
anyway,
sweet.
no, I'm a little depressed right now because that's horrible.
My last is really just kind of an example of something that might have started out as an interesting idea, didn't get fleshed out to anything, and became just a good idea between two friends that still justified an entire movie that made a lot of money and has been a touchstone for civilization ever since. But it's basically Easy Rider, 1969. I just can't get behind this type of movie where it's just
What, the big metaphor with a giant M Odyssey type thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
it ushered in a new era of almost like American New Age or
A
new
very temporary era where the stars could actually
Yeah.
avoid the Hollywood
Yeah.
system
yeah.
for a little while.
Yeah, but already Hopper killed it with his second movie, is what it comes down to, and was never able to get behind a camera again for like at least a decade. You know, now this is Peter Fonda, Edward Hopper, kind of chit chatting and saying, "Hey, I got this idea. I don't have a plot. Like, you know, want to smoke some marijuana and buy some motorcycles, and you know, like let's make a movie. Let's do that." Because it all started from the idea of Peter Fonda having an image of bikers, America, westerns, cowboys, freedom, Odyssey. And he's like, I look good in a cowboy hat. I look good on a motorcycle. I'll make a movie about myself and my friend. So basically, they try
On a
to
motorcycle with a cowboy hat.
yeah. And the bad guys are, you know, hillbillies. So they basically do this movie, and it's just like it starts off fine, and it's just like, and it's basically exactly that. It's the Odyssey. They're just trying to get to New Orleans. What happens in between makes no sense. Long, rambling conversations about freedom and the American way. And then they die.
Yeah.
You know, and it's
Pointless.
that's about as flat as the movie is. You know what I mean? Like, I can't, and it's just the fact that it did some sepia tone things and like some drug psychedelic moments, you know, and they actually filmed them smoking marijuana. I don't think that's a justification why this movie is good.
But they're dreamers, going through the history, trying to live the American dream, and they die because the American
Who are the
dream
characters? The
died,
characters are
man.
named. The characters named Wyatt
Yeah.
and Billy,
Yeah.
as direct reference to like obviously Wyatt Earp and Billy the Kid, because you know that's. I think they themselves saw themselves as this. You know what I mean? For sure.
For
You know
sure.
what I mean, like bigger than life. These lone people. You know, like society can't hold them back. And then
They
we got
don't
to,
belong in society.
and then we got to watch it. You know what I mean? Like if you paid the ticket, then you deserved it. You know what I mean? But
No, but I mean, like, I will say that, like, the movie really attempts really to just
was it
buy into the 60s counterculture. Like, it's an attempt to break away from the chains of Hollywood and to make a movie that young people will relate to.
Yeah, that's completely what it is.
And
Disenfranchised youth, too.
Yeah.
Socially conscious, disenfranchised youth.
I think it's one of those movies that's more interesting to read about than to watch. At least for me. You know, that's
Maybe.
kind of what it comes down to. You know, like there's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. You know, like it's an interesting. The characters themselves are bigger than life. Like beyond just the characters they're playing, like the actors. But as a movie, I found it sloppy.
It's funny that you mentioned this movie as one of the worst of the 60s because it's exactly 15 years ago that it was admitted into the U.S. Library of Congress. Yeah. So 1998, that makes it Clinton, I guess, that was in office?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Clinton disagrees with him, is what I'm saying. Frank, what is your number 3 pick for worst movie of the 60s?
I gotta tell you, like, the problem with me is putting them in order. Like, I haven't quite, like...
That's the problem with you?
I was struggling with which is worse than the ones... Okay, I'm gonna start off with Barbarella, Jane Fonda in 1968, basically based off the
French comic book.
French comic book, which was basically an excuse to have a lot of scantily clad females drifting around on the page, and somebody... Yeah, I'm trying metaphors.
So it's a French comic book behaving like an Italian comic book.
Yes. Essentially, my whole rationale for this particular movie being on this list is that there are certain ideas that shouldn't be attempted on the big screen, and that's one of them.
The Orgasmatron being one of them.
The Orgasmatron. Like, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's an excuse to see Jane Fonda, naked-ish.
Yeah, that's it. Scantily clad, never naked. Which
Never
is,
fully naked.
if you're gonna do a movie like Barbarella,
if you squint hard enough, though, like there's
no, not at all.
It's quite prudish as a film,
Exactly.
like for what it sets out to be. Like it ends up, you come away with it like.
And it's in the 60s. Like that's the thing that shocks me the most.
They could have easily gone.
Yeah, if you're gonna do artsy softcore porn in the 60s, why not just go full throttle, for lack of better term? But to give an idea, like beyond the softcore aspect of it, this movie is completely non sequitur. It's just one random gimmicky scene after the other, one crazy concept with cheesy special effects after the next, and this woman acting like this bubbly moron. It's sort of stumbling her way through the plot. Of which
and is
none.
rewarded for her stupidity.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, I just, that's the other thing that really grates on me. Like, I don't know. I mean...
Well, I don't know if that's very different from, like, things like Bananas. But my problem is that it sets out pretending to titillate and it never does.
Mm-hmm.
That's maybe, you're not wrong there.
Oh no, seriously, like the 60s are so full with rich intellectual erotica. Why would you waste your time with Barbarella? It has nothing to offer.
Yeah.
Speaking of erotica, like why didn't I name one of the Emmanuel movies as one of the worst of the 60s? Like, seriously, what was I thinking? This is terrible.
I thought that was more early 70s.
Oh, maybe you're right.
I think the first one was like late 60s, but
maybe.
All right, what is your number 2 pick for worst movie of the 60s, Frank?
My number 2 pick is not so much a bad movie as a bad actor, though the movie is very bad. It's Green Beret, starring John Wayne. A number of actors have been politically active over the years, but he just felt the need to basically call Hollywood one day and make a movie, supporting the Vietnam War, and it's a propaganda piece. Through and through, very bad. George Takei is in it, but sadly doesn't uplift the movie. Like, he actually took a break.
My.
He took a break from being Mr. Sulu for a while, so he missed out on a couple of episodes. It's kind of okay, though, because Chekhov was actually a better comedic foil at the time anyways. Sorry, George. But anyways, a whole bunch of no fun. It does depict the Soviet...
A whole bunch of no fun?
That's the name of the episode.
It's basically, like, John Wayne ranting and raving about how we really should be in Vietnam kicking ass.
Admit it, the only reason you're mad at this movie is because George Takei was taken away from Star Trek for a while.
A lot of people don't like John Wayne.
That's the takeaway here. It's like, therefore, I'm right.
That's pretty much the takeaway. Moving on to my first pick, very, very well deserved. Help, by the Beatles, which is to say, not the Beatles.
Isn't that Help from the Beatles? Oh no, wait, you mean the movie Help?
The movie Help! Exclamation point. I'm gonna jump on a soapbox for literally 10 seconds and say that music bands should not be making movies, even as an excuse, as a vehicle for performance and songs. It's a horrible mess, and I guess I'm pointing to that movie. There were others by the Beatles that were actually even worse. I think Magical Mystery Tour is even worse, if that's even possible.
Keeping it focused on the Help for a second, we never actually said what Help was about. Now, my memory.
Ringo gets a ring.
Like, isn't that the one where he's like being pursued by a religious cult
that needs to sacrifice him? Why? Because he has the ring, which cannot be taken off.
Okay, so listeners, you've heard that synopsis from Frank. Does that seem like a good idea?
Now it sounds like The Hobbit.
In later years, as a narrative entity, it just fails so miserably. I do like some of the musical performances. They have
from
a
the
few
Beatles. Do you like some of the musical performances from the Beatles?
There's isolated moment, but it's such a fast forward movie. It's a skip movie. It's a skip to that particular scene. Watch it.
Fast forward at one point.
Yeah.
Well, of course, yeah. They have the Benny Hill moments, because that's the thing too. They have the Benny Hill moments that are crazy, but it's just this notion of using cinema as a vehicle for publicity for bands is such a bad idea, because we are talking about different mediums. and trying to mix the two together has been done time and time again.
And
I'm not
going to support the movie because I have no vested interest in the movie. But the thing is, this is before the era of the video.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. So
it is.
So
it
you
is
don't.
like,
You've got America's Pops or whatever. Like you probably have a couple of these, like or like I don't know, Solid Gold. I have no idea what was on TV at the time, but it's just like there was But you had no music video world, you know what I mean? Like, which is a perfect venue for, you know, like this dreamscape of the music, you know, like mixed with like cinema, whatever. And this is what these movies were. These movies were the beginning of videos, and eventually they got cut up into videos.
No, but that's the thing. Cut them up on videos, absolutely. You know, but
this is the progression.
But stick a ring on Ringo and have him try to be sacrificed, which by the way is a fairly gory.
Yeah, I know. Like, I find that the premise is weird for this sort of vehicle. You want something light, you want something fun, you want something upbeat. It's like evil religion and murders.
Human sacrifice doesn't usually.
They're already so big at that point. I wonder if they probably had a say in it. Like they probably hated the fact that people were like adulating them. I think the through line that we've got out of this, you know, like discussion is basically that there's it's the laziness of storytelling that bothers, you know, whether it's the comedy, whether it's this thing that shouldn't really be a movie, whether it's like the art house thing that really like does it deserve the name of movie, you know what I mean? Like I don't know, and I agree, you know what I mean? Like there's something about that decade where it's just like they had good ideas, and it's just like, but some of their worst movies like really encapsulate this like lazy attitude, you know, to what it is they're actually producing, like the final product.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're finally moving away from a very tight control that the studios had in the 50s, 40s, and 30s into something where independent cinema can really step in. And the thing is, making a movie
is not easy. And
exactly.
You need someone to basically be saying like, okay, well, here's the budget. What are you doing? What are you doing?
Yeah,
you know?
pushing people. It's an enormous enterprise. And so, the worst movies that we're listing, a lot of them are independent films that are just made by people who, maybe just didn't have the energy and the fortitude to go through all the way to the end, or just maybe just were too high to really bother with the details, you know?
Yeah. Bloated is what it comes down to. Yeah.
All right, well, on that note, it's a good note to end, too. If you want to share with us your thoughts about the 60s, your worst movies of the 60s, you can write us at mail@idiomatic.com or post a comment at idiomatic.com. We're also on Facebook. We're also on Twitter. We're also on iTunes. Small message there. If you could like us on Facebook, follow us on Facebook, it would help us enormously in delivering content for you on a regular basis. So if you haven't done so already, please like us on Facebook.
Like us. We need your help.
We lack affection, generally speaking, is what I'm saying. Toodles.